Today we're talking about problem and solution. And what I kind of, so I met a person who every time they had a problem, they said, "Oh, I have this great opportunity." And I think that really helped me to reframe how I think about things and no longer going, "Oh, here we go," but like, "Ah, here we go. Okay, what do we have?" And so what I think makes this kind of interesting is when we talk about what do people need? What is a need? That's when we're talking about problems and solutions.
When people identify needs, they're really speaking to what their problems are.
Mhm.
It's difficult for people to actually identify the solution straight away to the solution to their problems. Mainly because if it was that easy, it would probably already exist.
I do that all the time with food. I'll be like, "Oh, I think I'm hungry." And then I realize that I'm actually just thirsty and that I needed to drink water. So what I thought was my need was really just not my need. But I
Right,
had to pay better attention to what was the underlying cause that was motivating it.
right. So maybe connecting this to the ideation process, what we want to really do is listen hard and understand people's problems. And then really what we do is we plug that into our experimental thinking ideation process and we drive towards solution. So we want to really think about those problems and then use those problems to find solution versus immediately just popping to this is the perfect solution. Let me work on that. No, we're actually working through a process to fix the problem.
I remember Henry Ford had initially said, he has a pretty famous quote that I think speaks to this. And it was, if I'd asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I love this quote. Mainly it's just kind of an interesting to think about, but it's an interesting thing to put yourself in Henry Ford's shoes and kind of think about how the discussion may have gone with a customer at that time and how he arrived at the automobile as the solution to this problem. So what he's saying is the problem was that people wanted faster horses. So there was something around, this is obviously a probably a very condensed sentence around like all the different things he was hearing, but that kind of arrived at, okay, they need faster horses. Well, they didn't say they needed an automobile. They said they needed faster horses. And so then we can kind of get ourselves in the frame of reference. Okay, well, what would have been step one when you talk to a customer? You said, "Hey, what's the problem? What's the current problem with your horse carriage?" And they said, "It's not fast enough." There you go. That's the problem then we're looking to solve. And now we think about, okay, what are all the different things that pop out about what may cause a horse and buggy not to be fast enough? And we don't just get in the mind frame of thinking, well, instead of running at 10 miles an hour, my horse needs to run at 20 miles an hour or whatever. We can think about all the different things that may slow down this method of transportation.
My horse gets tired. It can get sick. It needs food. I have to bring that food with me.
That's right. Different maintenance cycles, different storage problems,
Mhm.
all those things. And then, when you think about the automobile really solved this suite of problems that contributed to, the overall problem of horses being perceived as slow. And therefore, you're really solving a greater problem rather than just saying, "Hey, I need to figure out how to make a horse run faster."
When people are talking to Henry Ford, they might be saying, "Yeah, it's so frustrating. My horse has been sick 3 times this month." They're not saying my horse isn't fast enough. They're not saying, "Oh, I can't get from A to B." They're speaking to a subset issue. Do you have thoughts on how we can hear and be attentive to the true underlying content that is really being said? How we can hear our customer, not just for a faster horse, but for a car?
One of the principles that we use here is called root cause analysis. We're looking for the root cause of something rather than just the symptomatic cause. You can think about several different symptoms kind of overlaying on one Venn diagram. The place where all those symptoms overlap is the root cause. In Henry Ford's case, we'd have horses need to eat every so often or sleep every so often. I need to bring my food with me. I need a large pasture to store them in, all these problems, right? And we kind of put them on a Venn diagram. These are all symptomatic problems. We dig in, then we say, what do all these problems have in common? And what we identify is the horse. And so therefore, what we identify as the root cause is the horse. So then what we can work on is, okay, the horse is the problem. How do I get rid of the horse?
When we think about problem solution, we really need to think about how we get to an authentic need. And there are many ways to go about this, and we'll speak to how to survey, how to talk to customers or potential customers, etc. One of the ways that I go about that is really just by listening to everything going around. All of these kind of come together as I sort of see these little acknowledgments, and I see what's missing. So for me, I'm constantly looking for the space between things, and there's opportunities everywhere in the space between. So instead of trying to reinvent the wheel all the time, sometimes we need to find what makes it special and where the uniqueness is within it. With the coffee thing, if I wanted to, coffee catering was already a thing. I wasn't inventing that, but high-end, super quality, premium coffee catering was not. So for people that wanted that caliber of quality, there was no opportunity. So they had a need for an experience, and that experience was not being provided. Could they have filled their need with a coffee cart? Sure. Could they have gotten what they could through my business by this experience? No. So by seeing that missing opportunity, I was able to create a really successful business that was able to push that ahead. And that was literally just by seeing an industry and seeing what was missing and in between.
I'm interested here, Matt, as you talk to different people, or you're listening, you're hearing different potential symptoms. How do you kind of weight what you hear as, maybe just something that's a one-off kind of comment, or maybe something that is aggregating into kind of more of a real symptom? Or even when someone gives you maybe direct feedback, not all of those opinions are necessarily equally weighted. Sometimes someone will have a more qualified opinion or be more closely aligned with what you think kind of your core customer is. How do you kind of juggle different sources and then kind of weight what you're hearing as far as a real symptom or just something you should kind of forget about?
So I guess a real symptom is something that I would hear repeatedly. One person having an issue is not necessarily a problem. So like lots of people are saying it, well, there's an opportunity there.
Sure. So I think the question is, you're hearing all this data and you're really trying to bring that into a symptom that you can put down on paper, and then we can build this map around, let's say. As you're out doing this research, do you kind of self-filter? Are you just keeping it in your brain, and as you're hearing things, you kind of bucket and compartmentalize these things, or do you weight different opinions differently as you're going through this process?
So one of the main issues with talking to people is that people like to be a hater. Like if you look at Yelp, people are trying to be funny and will make negative claims, even if they don't understand what was occurring. I find that I take some of those things with a grain of salt because people just don't understand. But also within there, we can hear that there are opportunities. Not everyone is being a hater. Sometimes they have relevant gripes and thoughts, and we want to be able to, hear those and flex with them. But I think kind of what comes back, what I'm hearing you say, for me, it's that vision. Everyone is going to have an opinion, and there's a million different types of customers, but which one is my customer? And if they're really not going to be my customer, you could go get coffee from McDonald's. It's going to be perfectly fine. Like, you're not interested in the aspects that my coffee brings to the table, no problem. There are other solutions. But my solution needs to be different from McDonald's and match the intent of my action. And by doing that, I'm able to better get a gauge of the relevancy of people's opinions and thoughts. And that does help me to create a little bit better.
Yeah, I think what you're saying to me is problem and solution that we're working on really needs to be within the market that we think we can address and that we want to address. So that addressable market that we talked to last time, we're kind of looking for the problem solution within that band. Maybe that market needs to change based on what we find in our evidence. But if you're creating a high-end coffee solution and you're talking to somebody that would only ever buy their coffee at McDonald's, you can kind of weight that, opinion down versus maybe somebody that is core to your market, on whether or not think what you're doing is kind of the right thing.
And as you hone in on your idea, new problems and solutions crop up. So, I mean, at first it was I tried to be everything to everyone, and people were saying, "Oh, it's too expensive," and I can't be more affordable. And so then I made it far more expensive, and added a little bit more detail to make it what it represented, and people were immediately like, they stopped saying it was too expensive. I wasn't actually finding a problem, I was finding the wrong customer. So my solution was correct and my solution was in the right place, but I was focused around the wrong market and stakeholder. So by adjusting that, I was better aligned, and then I could actually hear the problems. So from there, once I got the market, then the problems became more clear. They wanted an experience, but they also wanted it made immediately. Those are counter. You can't have both at the same time. That was something I did. And we went from being able to serve a small amount of drinks to being able to serve the most out of anyone doing it, because we changed our process to represent it. So now through the process, we're able to speak to the experience while still giving that super high output at the same time. So we were able to find both, but it was only after we got the other pieces correct that the problems and solutions really became relevant to solve for, because the people that were telling me what their problems were my customer. Because I had a defined target customer, it was able to hear their actual need and know that it was relevant to what I was doing and the mission of the business. So that meant that there was an alignment that I was trying to solve for. But what we want to think about when we are surveying and talking to people and trying to hear these needs is not to ascribe our own bias to it and assume that we know what it means, or to affect the situation in a way that is going to change what people truly mean. What is your practice for removing bias from your language?
I think you need to be very careful about how you speak. You really want to think through when you ask a question, you want to make sure that of the available answers that people could give, none of them is necessarily negatively perceived. Otherwise, you're going to skew the data. You need to really think through how do you ask a question such that you give people the choice on how they can answer, but you're not framing it in a way where they need to feel bad about how they authentically answered that question. So it's difficult. It's very difficult. And it really requires going through the question in your mind, and even maybe going to trusted parties, directly answering them, and see, instead of maybe getting their answer, talking through, hey, how could answers be negatively perceived to this question? And almost running a survey on your survey to make sure that when you go out, you got the cleanest possible questions that you can have.
I actually think that's quite important. One of the main things I do for my business, I have a separate company as well focused around presence coaching. One of the main needs from people is to distill their language to something that is more authentic to them. We use marketing words and other things that flower something instead of creating truth. It's easy to misrepresent things through language, and it can be very helpful. I mean, literally the reason they come to me is they'll say something and I'll say, what does that mean to you? Oh, well, this and this and this. Okay, so you're saying yada yada? Yes. Okay, great. Well, then say that to me. And then they're having a much more truthful conversation. So by going to these people and asking them about that, you're going to get a much more validated language that should be a more cleaner, less biased result. I think that's essential.
I think the other thing that can inform maybe your language is the market you're talking to. If I'm talking to a group of engineers or technically minded individuals, or I'm talking to a group of salespeople, the same question could be leading or it may not be leading, depending on how that group generally interprets the language. So even understanding who I'm talking to is important to make sure I'm saying something in a way that lands with them and that they can understand. So language is individualized. It isn't the type of thing where everybody hears the same thing. People don't hear the same thing when you ask the same question. The way Steve Jobs defines a solution or a product is basically a package of emphasis. So there's an iPhone and there's an Android phone, and they're both phones, but they have different emphasis. The Apple likes design and emphasizes user experience, and Google's cloud services and price or whatever. They're both a similar product, but they have different packages, but they have different emphasis on what's important. When we're packaging a solution, you can think about the vision, the problem, and the customer kind of circling around the center point of what is our solution and what we're basically trying to fit and adjust. The vision, the problem, and the customer as we've defined it. Does the solution that we pop out with fill all the needs? And really, if we're being true to ourselves and honest, the vision, the problem, and the customer are facts. they're facts in reality. What we have the ability to change is our solution to fit those. Now, if we don't have the facts, if we don't have the facts of those three pieces spinning around correct, well, we can change them. But what we're really seeking is what is the true reality of those three pieces? And then when we identify that solution that kind of notches all those together, it makes perfect sense. And that's kind of what the process is. We're going around and we're kind of tweaking the vision, we're tweaking our problem, we're tweaking our customer, and then we get the solution that, oh, this fixes it the way we've defined those three things. This is the perfect solution. But then maybe we're like, well, we did a little bit of market research and the problem as we identified it isn't quite right. So we're going to tweak that. And the minute we do that, our solution is no longer viable. So we're going to need to tweak that a little bit. And that's kind of what the process looks like as you move forward in the ideation phase.
Part of what makes problem solution cool is that it's also a way to come up with your vision. If you feel that your vision isn't concise, or if you don't even have a vision yet because you don't even see the vision, by hearing these needs and seeing how you can affect it, you being the solution to that need, then within that is the vision. And that can also be another way of coming back to it. You can either start with the vision and work your way in, or you could start in places like this need and find the vision.
Yeah, that's right. So remember, we talked about that kind of cyclone, and basically these things are spinning around and forming each other at all times. So, as you learn more in one phase, that necessarily informs another phase that may change your thinking a little bit, which may change, your thinking in another in another section. So yeah, as we go through the process and we learn more, it's always changing, it's always developing, it's always moving. So yeah, 100%.
As an entrepreneur, what you'll realize is that different problems really naturally have different solutions. And what I mean by that is it's a little bit personalized. When you analyze your problem and your market, you're going to have a different vision and a different values and kind of a different worldview than another entrepreneur that may be thinking about the same thoughts that you're thinking about. You're going to be looking at a unique market and kind of how you envision that market. You're going to see customers with unique needs, requirements, and complexities versus another user base. And really the product that you pop out with your viewpoint is going to be different than what other entrepreneurs pop out. The point is really that that's a good thing. Personalizing your solution around your unique set of circumstances on how you view and experience the world is really important. One of the reasons that's important is we all have our own unique circumstances that we've come up with. There's some amount of luck, my upbringing, and where I was born, and the financial backings of my upbringing, who I know, the friends I have, and really kind of where I sit in the world. And that unique experience kind of necessarily changes the solutions and the business ideas that I can bring to fruition easier. If we think about this experimental philosophy and kind of this ideation process, what we're doing is we're taking that long span process and really trying to break it down into much smaller and much more easily achieved steps. And each one of those more easily achieved steps can become its own mini vision or mini product or process in its own right. And as we achieve each one of those middle milestone steps, we've kind of got a unique opportunity to maybe turn that idea into its own freestanding idea that then we can build upon, or maybe it's its own product. And we kind of can build upon these things rather than simply having to achieve the vision in our one go. So it really breaks it down into something that's a little more measured and a little more digestible than having to achieve major milestones.
So what I'm hearing from your idea, if I'm to spin it to an acting stance, actors will all get the same script, but each actor is going to have a very different portrayal of how they will communicate that script. That is based on their life and their experiences and their knowledge base and their creation of the world around that script, etc. So it is them that is being brought to the table. That's why their path is going to be completely unique, and the same thing with these businesses.
Right. And I think in your actor example, you never really know what the director wants. Your best chance of success is being authentic to who you are.
Yes. To that point too, it's what allows a brand to have a voice. It's what creates a brand. There's a difference between an actor and Christopher Walken. Christopher Walken, you can pick out of a group of 100. He has a specific sound, a specific cadence, a specific mannerism, these things that make him unique and differentiate him from the rest of the crowd. That then is what gets into that blue ocean strategy concept. He's not just trying to be weird and different. He is simply being himself, and he is very true to that. And that authenticity people resonate with because it is special unto itself. And I think the same thing comes through with brand. And that's what makes a clearly defined vision, something that truly compels your spirit, so essential, so that you are Christopher Walkening your objective. You want that unique, special thing that can only come from you. And that's why I think it's less likely that people can even steal your idea, because if they did, it's still going to be something different because it's how they see it, not how you see it. Take some confidence in that what you bring to the table and what you put down when you really have your heart attached to it is the value.
Right. If we're really truly honest, then attaching that to feasibility is really easy. Because if we're really truly honest about what our vision is, and we're really truly honest with what we can achieve, well, then the likelihood of those syncing up is pretty close to 100%.
So now that we have a sense for how to look for and hear true needs, what do we do with that from there?
Really, the end point of kind of our ideation process is a solution. So the process of working through finding a solution is this experimental thinking ideation process that we've talked about. What we want to do is really, again, shrink that down into incremental little steps. And each one of those steps we run an experiment on, and we hope to find evidence that whatever little problem we're solving for in that step, we either have a yes or a no and kind of build upon that. When we're thinking about how to build a solution, the way we go about it is talking about a minimum viable product. What we basically want to do is piece all these little experiments together until we get to the minimum viable solution that our customers will accept as resolving their problem. Now, that doesn't mean that it's the end all be all, but it's something that resolves minimum thing that we can enter a market in that consumers will accept.
When you're in ideation phase, is an MVP even, are we there yet? The purpose of ideation is to assess if we want to move to a bigger step, potentially turn this into a business. That potentially turning into a business part would be where we'd be making an MVP. So maybe we're making more like an MVP, see if that need solution is right for our target customer as based on our current information.
Sure. And this is why I brought up the term minimal is important, because minimal can always be reduced. That's kind of the same type of philosophy here, is you can always continue to reduce minimal. What we really want to reduce these things down to is what's going to give us that motivation that the way we're thinking is right. And that becomes what's minimal. What's the minimal amount of evidence that if we saw positive signals that we'd be like, all right, I'm onto it, let me move it on. And that's really what we're searching for in this whole thing. It's about gaining confidence. It's not about taking risk. We want to minimize our risk. We don't want to take grandiose risks. We want to take calculated, measured, minimal risks and stack those on top of each other to infinity. If we can stack tiny things on top of each other for forever, we can build the tallest tower in the world. So what we basically do is once we've identified these symptoms and we've identified a root cause, we break that down into our incremental experiments and we start moving up the process. I think the term minimal is an important term to focus on because it's a term that a lot of ideators don't focus enough on. Really identifying what's minimal is important because at the end of the day, depending on our resources available to us, the term minimal changes. A well-funded startup that's got millions of dollars versus somebody that's paying for something out of their own pocket, minimal can mean very different things. So we really want to focus on what's minimal for us. What can we put into this? And by tuning that and thinking about, okay, how far can I move this? What does my minimum viable solution at the end of this line of experiments look like? Do I think I can get that to that with the resources I have available? How many experimental steps do I think it's going to take to get there? We can kind of assess whether we're being realistic about where we'll end up or not. The worst thing that can happen through the process of finding a solution is that I get about halfway and I run out of resources, because then I don't really have any evidence if what I'm working on can ever pop out the end as a viable solution.
Based on our idea canvas, it seems like we'll get into feasibility more later, next. So it's a little bit less about resources and it's more about what are the different ways of attacking this need or this problem. From the ideation stage, solutions are possibilities. There's a million ways to potentially solve for something. So I think if I am hearing you correctly, you're saying that this MVP, as we did for stakeholders, we're finding as many potential solutions to a problem, and we are using the canvas as a modular testing process to say, this vision, does DIY Dan have this need? Would he purchase a thing that solves for it in this way? And if that answer is no, then maybe we're starting with White Glove Betty, have this problem. oh, she doesn't have this problem. Okay, so that's not it either. And we can keep modularly working through matching these things until we're finding a symmetry of thought. Is that what you're saying?
I think so. When we think through the ideation process, we've talked about breaking this down into very small steps that add up on top of each other. The red individual steps group together to form a larger blue milestone achievement. And then those blue milestone achievements stack on top of each other to form some larger achievement. So what we're really talking about is we're in the red phase right now, trying to get to our first blue milestone achievement. Chances of success of moving to a blue milestone achievement become ever greater the shorter we make that blue milestone achievement. And if we consider that first milestone our MVP, the quote unquote easier we make our MVP to achieve, the more likely we are to succeed. So if I could give an example for a minute, I was working with a founder who had an idea for a couponing app where restaurants could give out coupons that were only during the middle of the day when traffic was low. The idea was we're going to make an app that can do this, that restaurants can sign up, they give coupons away. People can come in, show that they've got the coupon, use it at a certain time. Cool, right? Okay, so his MVP was a very simplistic app that allowed him to do this. Now, it was going to cost $5,000 for the MVP, but it was a very simple app. That's what it was. My first response was, why can't you do this with paper? Like literally print out coupons and put a time on them and see if anybody will use this. See if anybody cares enough about a $2 deal to come in, for lunch an hour early. If we talk about like, how can I get into the market as fast as possible to determine if anybody cares about the core root cause of that this issue is solving, to me, that's a much easier and faster way of doing it rather than spending 6 months building an app, and spending a considerable amount of cash to determine basically the same thing.
That makes sense to me. Jack Dorsey from Twitter, I think it was, said, if you're not embarrassed by your first prototype, then you took too long, or your first product, I guess you could say. That resonates in the same way. If you are spending all your time making something that's even a $5,000 version of a simple app, then you're plausibly going above and beyond your validation step.
Yeah.
Validate and then put out something awesome and build on it.
One last point, especially for young early stage companies that are very early in conception and maybe only have one individual. If you really can't build your MVP by yourself, your first MVP, it's probably not the right MVP. If you need to be hiring somebody outside to help see if your idea has any credibility at all, you're probably going about it wrong. That's usually a pretty good indicator.